So instead, you have a daughter of a potter and a ceramic engineer who, to her parents' great disappointment, studied glass in graduate school. I'm Chris Eckel, and so I'm really excited to be here at the education panel for both art and science. So that's me. Himanshu Jain is the T.L. Diamond Distinguished Chair Professor of Engineering and Applied Science and the Director of Institute for Functional Materials and Devices at Lehigh. He helped establish and served as the Director of NSF's International Materials Institute for New Functionality in Glass, which pioneered globalization of glass research and education and led to multiple international glass research centers in different countries. And lately, he's been advocating for use-inspired research and has led the development of a new doctoral education model, the Pasteur Partners PhD, or P3, based on industry-university partnerships. Welcome, Himanshu. Anu Agarwal received her doctoral degree in electrical engineering from Boston University in '94, where she investigates the spatial extent of point defect interactions in silicon. She's been at MIT since that time, except for a short stint at Clarendon Photonics, where she was part of a team of engineers developing a novel optical filter. Currently, as a principal research scientist, she is developing integrated size Cmos compatible linear and nonlinear materials for photonic devices, especially in the mid-IR regime for hyperspectral imaging and chem biosensing, because most chemical and biological toxins have their fingerprints in this range. Welcome, Anu. Next, we have Jackie Petro, a PhD 82, an accomplished higher education administrator and award-winning teacher who is widely published in computational biology, was named the 15th president of Albright College in 2016. The first Albright alumnus or alumna to lead the college, Petro began her tenure as president in 2017. She earned Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from Albright in '82, the doctorate in Biological Chemistry from Penn State in '86, and she returned to her alma mater, where she was provost and vice president for academic affairs from the University of Richmond, where she was provost. And as provost, she served as the university's chief academic officer, as provosts usually do. And as a higher education leader, Petro serves on the board of directors for Campus Compact and the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities of Pennsylvania, the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities Committee on Accountability, and the Science Research Institute Advisory Board. Welcome, Jackie. Ms. Adele Schad is the Dean of Pre-College and Summer Programming, also at Albright College. Prior to Albright, Adele was a teacher at Conrad Weiser High School for 25 years, and she is the founder and director of the Science Research Institute, formed in 2015, and the CEO of Converge Ed, LLC, formed in 2018. She earned a Bachelor of Science from Westchester University. In 2006, she earned a Master of Education degree from Kutztown University in Biology Education. In 2015, she earned a Master of Science in Clinical Microbiology from the Jefferson Graduate School of Biomedical Science in Philly. Currently, Adele is a PhD candidate in cell and molecular biology at the University of the Sciences in Philly. Welcome, Adele. Scott Cooper is Global Glass and Materials Science Leader for Owens, Illinois. Scott leads a global team of glass scientists and materials engineers for the world's largest manufacturer of glass bottles and jars. His team has responsibility over glass formulation, properties, R&D, and manufacturing operations spanning 72 factories in 20 countries. And in 10 years at OI, he has hired and mentored various roles such as student co-ops, technicians, scientists, and manufacturing support engineers. He's currently serving as president of the Glass Manufacturing Industry Council, GMIC. Prior to coming into the glass industry, Scott obtained his PhD at University of Florida with a focus on bioactive glasses. Throughout his career, he has always valued international collaboration in glass by pursuing work and educational experiences in China, Brazil, and Germany, and he'll be making his remarks in those languages. Scott became fascinated in glass through the art world, first being exposed to ceramic pottery as a teenager and later apprenticing with a glass artist. Welcome, Scott. Judith Schechter, adjunct professor at Tyler School of Art, Temple University in Philly, and adjunct professor of craft at the University of Arts, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Judith is an active glass artist, and she has collections at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Victoria and Albert in London, the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, and the Renwick at the Smithsonian here in town. In May, she'll be receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award from GAS, the Glass Art Society. I think I already said in May. Welcome, Judith. Okay, so we have a couple of questions prepared, and then it would be really great for this to be the beginning of the interactive portion of these 2 days, because we've had a lot of, one way. So I hope that you'll be thinking of your questions, but to get us kicked off, because we are now talking about art and science together at this meeting, which I'm really happy about. Some people talk about art and science as two sides of the same coin, but I prefer this idea from Mae Jemison, who talks about art and science are avatars of human creativity. So what are the similarities in education between artists and technical people?
Just want to volunteer? All right, I'll volunteer, because I never hesitate to volunteer. I think that what you said is exactly right. Science and art are two avatars of human creativity. I have for a number of years run science research labs, and I always loved those students who were majoring both in something in the arts as well as the sciences, because that's who your creative thinkers were. They were able to think outside of the box. They hadn't been taught just to follow the trail. They had been taught to think over here or ask the question over here. So at Albright College, we think definitely that art and science are part and parcel of the same piece of human creativity and innovation. In our Science Research Institute, we don't just have the science focus, but we also have a public arts studio right there where the students are learning together. The chemistry, the materials of art as well as science. So they are definitely, creativity comes in many forms, and art and science are both manifestations of that.
Thanks, Judith. Other comments? Adele?
Yeah, I can address one of the items that Jackie talked about. And when we talk about Science Research Institute, we're looking at K-12 education and teacher training. And much of the research happens with 5th graders to 12th graders. And so there's definitely a piece of seeing science in the arts and having scientists think like artists at times. But I would also flip that around to say we are looking at public art in our city and in our county, and how to encourage art students to think like scientists, which is the opposite of what some people may think. But when you look at art, material science, I know I'm talking to the, preaching to the crowd here, material science underlies every discipline. And so we can have art students start to take a look at the materials they use and the science behind that. I think that collaboration goes both ways.
Yeah, I'll support that. As a material scientist myself, we were just talking last night, and I was talking to several of you, and the same theme came up, which is both the artists and the scientists need to understand the material in their own ways. But understanding of materials requires that material science knowledge as well as the information from someone who works with the glass. So in terms of glass particularly, I think, for example, a color. What exactly happens to the glass structurally when the color changes? And the artist has to know about it in order to use that in their art.
Judith? I think Judith might have something to say.
Can you hear me? Yes, I'd like to offer an alternative point of view. I've taught art. I've never taught science. My father was a scientist at Tufts, a microbiologist for many years. He used to tell me how creative science was. All right, of course it is. I just think that there are differences. I don't have any argument with the fact that artists should know about the materials they're using. As a college level, someone who teaches at the college level, oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so, I've grown, I'll just scream. I'm so tired of how obsessed with science we are. It's the art part has gotten lost. One of the things I think is a difference between visual artist thinking and maybe science thinking. And of course, like I said, I've never been a scientist. I did really well on my science achievement test in high school 40 years ago, but I didn't pursue it. One of the things I think is that artists do not have to be beholden to any system of thought. They're not they don't even need to have a theory. They just need to work with materials. And the more I teach, the more I see visual arts becoming what I call liberal artsified. And I think that's unfortunate. It's not, another thing I'll say is, what I understand from looking at art with a really long perspective, because I like art history, is that art likes to ally itself with whatever is the most truthful reality there is. So for centuries, that was the Christian Bible, if you're talking about Northern European art. So art was basically illustrating the truths of the Bible. And now we live in a secular society, and I would say artists are much more interested in showing a scientific, material version of reality. I'm an atheist, but I do think that there's things about art, like when I was watching the liver cancer thing, I was thinking, all right, well, we're not going to cure liver cancer with glass art, but I think we're going to prevent suicide. So that's pretty good. You own life. We own the meaning of life. So together, we make a whole thing.
That's a great point.
Can I maybe follow that up? Maybe. I'm from the science side, and so I think you said that they're both avatars of curiosity? Creativity. I think one is to express the human condition, and one is to solve problems, right, that may exist in society or the world. But I think the really, really good people see that those are intermeshed, just like what you were saying, is that to maybe solve that problem, you will alleviate some of the human condition of that suffering, right? So.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's a very interesting perspective. We have some diverse perspectives on the panel, which always makes for a very interesting panel, and I hope we take something away. I want to bring a topic that we heard this morning about the missing millions. And so can you comment on any of your activities to reach underserved populations in education? Anu?
So in Massachusetts, we have something called the Lab for Education and Application Prototypes, which the state has actually funded, 5 of them across the state. And they've funded it such that they've located it in a geographically diverse way. So every lab is associated with a few community colleges around it. So the idea is you not only teach your own undergrads and grads and postdocs, but you also have boot camps and workshops for community college students and high school students around which the lab is located. And so that's a good way to bring in or reach maybe not the millions, but the thousands who are around those particular labs. And it's called the LEAP Network in Massachusetts.
I guess these aren't working, but I'll turn it on.
Yeah.
They're working on it.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah, try.
So yeah, the missing millions, that really resonated with me. And there's a research paper out about Pennsylvania, and it talks about the spaces in between State College and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And it says that the state of Pennsylvania, where we are from, is losing ground in science and technology because they are not taking advantage of the spaces in between. I think some of those are the missing millions. And so what we are attempting to do at Albright College at both the college level and the K-12 level with the partnership with Science Research Institute is to exactly offer that opportunity, particularly in the middle high school and high school level, for students who wouldn't be able to walk into an artist studio or to a science lab or get their hands on a piece of equipment safely to develop their creativity, their own questions. And our hope is, not our hope, we're actually seeing the data as a number of these students already in high school have applied for patents. We're seeing these kids coming right out, kids who are kind of failing some of our specific fact-based science education that the state of Pennsylvania requires. But in asking their own questions, we're bringing them into the fields of science, technology, and engineering.
Thanks, Jackie.
I'd love to answer this.
Okay.
I think in the arts, there's always been first of all, most of the artists I know are liberals and are very, very concerned about issues of diversity and inclusion, and we're not doing very well at it, in my opinion. I think there's always been a division between craft and fine arts. I think sometimes the fine arts is very exclusive, and they want to be liberal, but you can't be liberal and exclusive at the same time. It doesn't work very well as an economic model. The second thing is craft has always been inclusive, and that's why it's like the other. However, in terms of being an academic discipline, I think the administration thinks we walk around in like historical costumes, and we're working in little reconstructed villages. Not so. There's not a lot of respect for it in academia. If you were going to ask the question about the future of it, I'll say it's not good. But the one thing I wanted to say is that glass has never, you have to be rich to do glass. And if you graduate with a Bachelor of Fine Arts or a Master of Fine Arts in glass, how are you going to keep doing it unless you have a ton of money? So it's, one of the things, I spoke with my colleague Jessica Julius at Tyler before even beginning to attempt to talk about glass education. And she pointed out to me that for many, many years, the model has been hot shop centric. And she said, we can't keep doing a hot shop centric model. There are many other forms of glass as an art medium. And if we're just recruiting to the hot shop, we're going to perpetuate, first of all, very sexist, even the words, like, I'm not even going to say the words. They're all dirty, and, they're funny, but they're not that funny. Anyway, all right, that's good enough.
Thanks, Judith. Yeah, actually, I want to ask what you're doing at Lehigh for increasing the DE&I in education. Must be something.
Yeah, but before I get to DEI, I'd like to, we got some questions from the organizers, so thanks to the organizers. And so I'd like to come to the question, and if I may. And the last question here is, are there educational areas in need of improvement? And that's something we have been worrying about, as part of the IMI program earlier, related to glass. And are glass specialists lacking instruction in one or more of the critical areas? Is this okay to address?
Now or later.
Now or later, okay. So this is the kind of thing that we have been thinking about. Are there educational areas in need of improvement? The answer is very much so. And let me put you in the context. So we heard about that NSF was established 70 years ago. So for 70 years, we have been training, and I'm going to focus primarily on graduate education or even or a doctoral level education, and I see that's the cutting edge. So yes, I think what we're talking about is very important, how we're going to move the wider populations in millions, but really, if you look at the whole technology, it is pushed forward by the people at the cutting edge, and that's where the PhDs are. That's what their job is supposed to be. So I'm going to focus on the PhDs. And so if you look at the nature of PhD in the United States, hasn't changed very much. And in fact, it's quite different than, let's say, some European countries, most of the European countries. Here we students take graduate courses, then they do the qualifying exam, and we keep on doing the same thing. And so the question is, are we doing very well? How far are we doing the way we're training? And something that I learned, if I take too long time, just ask me to shut up.
One more minute.
So if you look at one thing that we learned talking to this through IMI program, get to talk to people in industry. And the matter of fact in the United States is that 90% of the engineering PhDs do not work in academia. And 84% of science PhDs do not work in academia. On the other hand, professors like myself, we keep on cloning ourselves. And so there is this discrepancy on what we are producing and what our employers are looking for. And so that's where we see the challenge. And so we have been thinking about it, how to address that. But I think that's where there is a need to do something about it. And that needs to be done something rather soon. And we heard about it, that NSF and the funding agencies are recognizing this, in that this linear model that you do the most fundamental research, and then somebody will use it, and then somebody will turn it into a product and make money. That has That is important, right? That's how the Vanover push model was started out. But that, I think, is also the cause of why Bell Lab closed. Why Yorktown Heights does not do, IBM does not do any fundamental research, because it's unsustainable model. So when you look at the sustainability of the funding mechanisms and what for PhDs, I think we need to be focusing on use-inspired research. And this morning we heard a lot from Wendell Weeks. Everything that Corning does in their own house is all about use-inspired research. But that does not translate into education. That does not translate into training of PhDs at Lehigh, at Penn State, at Ohio State. That does not work. So my point is that really we need to bring Corning's and DuPont's and all these big companies which hire PhDs to work with academia and to really develop a PhD program. I can give you some more of our own thoughts that we have been pursuing more in more detail. But that's it, I'm going to shut up.
Thank you. Is there a question from the audience? Anybody have a question? Irene?
So actually, this isn't really a question, and it's just my own personal opinion to just respond to that. And that if the companies are doing use-inspired research and the national labs are kind of in the middle, then the question then becomes who is really doing the out-of-the-box, really new things? Because if the universities don't do it, then who's doing it? And so. My own experience and the experience with my interns and co-op students is it works really well if the universities develop people that can start from zero and become an expert in a brand new field in 4 or 5 years, right? Because that teaches, my professor taught me to learn that way, you teach your students to learn that way. When they come in as interns, when they come in as co-ops, we can train them how to use the knowledge that you have taught them to read the literature to become an expert, and we can teach them how to become problem solvers. This is my opinion, not necessarily, that doesn't reflect my company, but this is my own opinion, of doing this with students and interns and new employees for about 20 years now.
Now joining the panel will be Irene. So I think that's a very specific conversation the two of you are having, and maybe other people might be interested. There are some other topics that I'd like to get to, but Adele, are you trying to make a point?
Yes, I am. And
I have, I think I can address your comment and the 2 prior questions.
Okay.
So, thinking about the workforce development, the PhD programs, one thing I'm really serious about in the Science Research Institute is that it doesn't start in college. The mindset, the culture, the skills need to be built K to 12 for this to work. And so I think K to 12 needs to be in the conversation. The other piece we are completely dedicated to is getting industry tools in students' hands. And this also addresses the spaces in between. So the school where I started this, if I would look outside of my classroom window, there was a horse farm and a cow farm and field, and then about 10 miles away is one of the poorest cities in Pennsylvania. So the dichotomy there and having a lack of research institutions like you would have in a place like Philadelphia was the spot to say, okay, we need places for K to 12 to go. And I really focus in research on 5th through 12th grade. How do we get real tools into their hands so that they're not doing science with a toothpick and a cotton ball? So let's learn micropipetting, biosafety cabinets, bioprinting. Let's get a furnace. Let's create safety procedures so that they can operate. When you take away those science and technology barriers, and they're accustomed to the tools that you all use, then their minds can create, because they're not sitting and thinking about, what do I do with this thing sitting in front of me? So I think combining those things addresses the spatial divergence, the opportunity, and then what you see higher up the chain, I'm going to say from our Little League.
Thanks, and thanks. That's great. Did you have a quick point?
I was just going to talk about, one of the other questions that had come up was what kind of innovations are there in class? And if you want me to wait on that, I'll wait.
You can address it now.
Okay, thanks. So one of the questions that were asked was, what kind of innovations do you foresee from glass in the future? And I'm talking about it from a technologist standpoint. The properties of glass are pretty unique. We worry for the future, for example, transparency of the glasses. How transparent are they in the mid-infrared and near-infrared range, which is what we use for communication or transmission of light or photons through the material, so transparency. The refractive index is important. The phase change control from amorphous to crystalline is important. Yesterday I heard about someone actually creating very large-scale crystalline materials out of glass. That's very exciting as well. How about the Cmos applications of glass? Everybody uses silicon nitride, silicon carbide amorphous, silicon dioxide in microelectronics and now in photonics as well. Someone mentioned today about glass in packaging. And packaging is a huge problem because we do not have enough workforce that knows how to do packaging of microelectronic chips today in the US. So all of this together, I feel, leads to the next level. The innovation of glass comes from trying to mold its properties. And today there was a really nice talk about how you can use AI and machine learning to make that happen. How can you designer glass is what Professor Kathleen Richardson used to do for us, she still does. Chalcogenide glasses, non-oxide glasses. So how to design glass to create new uses for them, new applications, maybe LiDAR, maybe datacom, telecom, maybe sensing, maybe have a spectroscopy. All of this requires glass and glass property control.
Thank you. Anybody else might like to comment on where glass education is headed, or what are the innovations that are spurring change in this area, or maybe barriers to innovation in glass education? Judith?
Me?
I'm sorry, not the J name next time.
I'll answer that.
You will. Jackie first.
So innovations in education, I think of three, one of which we've already talked about, and that is engaging the creativity and innovation of students when they are in middle school and high school, so that they're asking their own questions. They know about materials and material science and glass science are possible career paths. They know they can go to be doctors, they know they can be lawyers, but they don't really know much about material science when they're in K-12, and that's one of the things we're working on. I think the second barrier you asked is the silos in higher ed. Interdisciplinarity is really important in moving science and technology forward. And the academic structure of okay, I'm going to be biology here and chemistry here and physics here. Material science goes across all of those areas. So breaking down those silos and figuring out how we help students at all levels, whether middle, high school, college, or in grad school, to cross those barriers is really crucial. And then the third is inspiring, and we've already talked about it, the missing millions. How do we bring these opportunities out of the big cities? How do we bring them into places like Reading, Pennsylvania, which is a very diverse population, in the public schools? It's not just the big PhD researchers we need. We need students who are going to come out of high school and want to go into manufacturing, or who are going to go into college level and then be scientists. They don't need the PhD. We need all levels of those, and providing paths for all different students with different interests, as you and I talked about, Scott, I think is really important.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, and if I can add a little more color on that.
Yeah.
This glass community is pretty tight-knit. We're focusing on making bachelor's and PhDs in glass science. And for the needs of the US, from my perspective, we're doing okay there. Where we are dramatically short is in the trades. So the glass industry has about 85,000 people working in the US. Bachelor's, PhD level glass scientists, we need hundreds, 1,000 of those to sustain the industry. We need tens of thousands of electricians and machinists and millwrights and mold makers. And those jobs don't have the prestige that they used to. People don't want to go into those careers anymore, and that's really a shame. I think in this country there's been a cultural shift where people believe that they need a 4-year degree or more to punch their ticket to prosperity, and I think that's misguided, because there are really well-paying jobs to do those things. To be an electrician, you can make a good living, sustain a family, and that is where our huge gap is right now.
Thanks, Scott.
That's right, everyone wants to be management, no one wants to be labor.
Right, exactly, exactly.
Judith, did you have a point you wanted to make before we get to Marina's question?
Is it barriers to education or
The
innovation?
question as it was asked in the email we got was about technological innovations for education. And I really thought that in the arts, technological, we'll just, steal whatever the sciences figures out. And if we get enough money to buy one, we'll play with it and it'll be awesome. What I really think is that that's another way that science really differs from technology. If you look at the history of art from 20,000 years ago, the paintings in Lascaux, what we're doing now isn't better than that. There's been no innovation in the arts, and until we actually mutate into another species, there probably won't be. So that's the only innovation I can think of that would matter in the arts, is to mutate.
So,
I was worried about the artificial intelligence.
but tying back to some of this workforce pressure where we don't have the trades and things like that, what it's actually forcing us to do, not necessarily by our own choice, is because we can't get those people, we have to move to more automated systems, right? So the talk before lunch about big data and all that, that is coming. That's going to be a reality. But it's also partially driven because we don't have the people to watch the process.
You know where all your students who flunked their SATs are going? Art school. And it seems a shame that we're not helping them use their hands, because art school education has become very liberal artsified. And it suffers from the exact same schism that you're talking about. We don't respect making art. People who like the real fancy artists to make billions of dollars, they make phone calls. Make my art. Thank you. Here's a check. I'm gonna Venmo it to you. So I think that what you're talking about is
Well,
everywhere.
and what you're talking about is people who are makers.
Yes.
That's what we're short on, is the makers.
A point of agreement.
Yes.
Yeah, I just like to make a point somewhat different. What is lacking is exposure to team science. And that's something, because really the society and the industry and everybody need to solve a problem. Problems are not glass problems. They are not a mechanical engineering problem. They are societal problems, and they require all kinds of integrations. I think that it has to go in the mindset of the student that yes, you will be digging deep into a particular area, whether it is glass or it is something else, but at the same time, you got to be aware of what else is needed to solve the problem. And I think that has to come as the student goes through from whatever track they go.
Thank you. Marina, do you have a question?
I just want to flip it a little bit, but relating to diversity and the millions and starting young. I'm just going to throw this out there, not anything we need to discuss right now. I still think that there are a lot of grade school and middle school teachers who do not feel comfortable teaching science, for example, particularly hands-on science. It might be a little different in high school, but if we're really going to try to address technical education for young kids, perhaps one of the other things we ought to be addressing is teacher training in this country to make sure that teachers feel comfortable teaching chemistry and biology and whatever to third graders and seventh graders. So I just thought that.
Adele.
I can talk about this.
All day. So yes, through the Science Research Institute, we created a one-year training program for graduate courses in educational innovation and entrepreneurship. Excuse me. It's a certificate now and a master's degree. But what we're finding is we are teaching those adults, those teachers, in the method that we want them to teach their classroom in. It's called total experience learning. And what teachers need is that support. Many of them, especially elementary, they receive a broad education. So the specific, the fine details of anything, science, go to the social studies, etc., the arts, it's not there. So one thing we've done to address that is in these teacher groups, create cohorts of them so that the school district puts groups of teachers together. So they're not a one-off on their own trying to learn something, taking it back by themselves. Now they have a group of 10 to 15 colleagues all looking at the same things. They can talk at lunch, they can catch each other after school, and then we'll move to the next group of 10 to 15, and then there's a tiered mentoring system in the same process. But I think that teacher support has suffered with all of the money going towards standardized testing. And now what I think you see is a United States shortage in teachers and people leaving their profession because they didn't have the support. So I think that's an area we really need to address.
Thank you. Oh, Renee?
At MIT, what we've been trying to do to address this is create game-based learning for children from young age all the way up to even master's level, PhD level. And the game changes depending on the age, but the idea is expose the student to think as they're playing the game. And kids nowadays are very adept at gameplay. So if you give them questions that they have to solve before they go to the next level, they will find answers somehow or the other. So we found it to be very, very helpful. And we try to make these a visual impact game. So what we do is we say, okay, you got to the next level, but let's see, you answered the question right, but let's see why is it right? And we add that little tidbit of information. Some students may skip it, but we teach it as they're going to a higher and higher level. So that's another way to reach them.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
I do. To Adele. So I'm sort of in between the graduate level professors here and you. I teach at Cole College, run the graduate school. Tell me what I'm very interested in. When you say Science Research Institute, tell me the sorts of activities the high schoolers do. I'm interested.
That'll be a brief answer because then you two can connect.
Okay. Anything you can imagine happens in science research. It's because every kid follows their own idea. So there's been over 5,000 students through. There's 5,000 different stories, and many of them are interdisciplinary in nature. So I mean, it is art, it is social studies, it is science, it is, drone science, augmented reality, all of these things piled together to follow whatever idea pops into a 5th to 12th grader's head, which if you can imagine.
Why don't you tell your favorite story? What's your favorite story of a student? Favorite story you were checking?
The math student? Okay, all right. So I'll try to make this really, really short. I had this student, and I said 5,000 students, 38% of them are special education IEP students. This isn't just a gifted kind of thing. It's any student across the board. This student was special education in math, had been told his entire career that he was not good at it. And he, by the time I had him as a sophomore, would leave school during math class, or I'd find him hiding in the lab somewhere. He loved forensic science, and so his question walking into me one day was, if there was a dead body laying on the ground and the maggots were eating the body, but somebody took the body, could you get the DNA out of the maggot and figure out who that person was? My brother's in forensics, so I could ask him if there was an answer to that question. He said no. So we stuck some pork chops outside, maggots ate them. We dissected the intestine. I had this kid figure out a PCR and genetic sequencing, which is a ton of algebra, to be able to see if that DNA was in the maggot. This kid did it. He could talk about it for hours. And again, to shorten the story, I had to convince him to take this to a science fair because he said that wasn't for kids like him. It was only for the smart kids, but he ended up winning Princeton's University's Use of Mathematics Award for the science fair.
Wow.
And you know, you see a kid and parents just tears rolling out of their eyes. So I think that's where that, when you let kids follow whatever they want and what their ideas are, and you keep them safe to do it, they'll do more than you ever thought they could do.
Yeah, thanks. Imagine if all the teachers were as creative and supportive as you in that program and finding ways to get students involved.
Yeah, but you prevented him from going to art school.
I'm not sure if to follow that, but let me ask a question. So, I mean, I go back a little bit to Scott's point, and I agree. Look, I think that what Adele is doing, what Adele and others built, like Conrad Weiser, is certainly a possible solution, without a doubt, and it has the advantage, as Jackie said, that it's portable to rural settings and things like that. But you're also competing, and I think this is what you were going with, is that with the fact that American high schools in particular, you know, funding has been cut so dramatically. I'm not even sure most of our high schools have shops. And our programs as well being cut. So I don't know. I mean, I think that yes, that is certainly a possible model. I'm just worried as to how scalable that is at a time when schools are barely managing to cover the basics or
So
to
you-
cover. So I'll just leave that as a question.
Yeah, I think what these ladies are doing is perfect. You have to expose them, at least offer an experience to where they might say, oh, that's cool, and maybe go further, right? But then I think we need to be able to comfortably say at the high school level, it's not military or college. There's other routes too, right? And maybe it's an apprenticeship program, maybe it's a 2-year program. But that is a huge gap in this country. And other countries have figured it out, right? So our operations in Europe, we don't have this problem, right? Because there's apprenticeship programs in Germany, things like that. We just have not been able to grasp that. So one thing we're working on with GMIC is we've outlined what an education or a certificate in glass manufacturing could look like. Not necessarily for the bachelor's level, but for the shop floor people. So.
And you ask exactly the right question. How do you make this scalable so you can hit more students? And that is actually one of the reasons that Adele is now at Albright College, because we are bringing in the business partners and entrepreneurs are thinking, okay, no, we're not setting this up in every single high school. That's not sustainable, particularly with public education. But we can train the teachers and educate them in the method. And then we can provide locations, and people in this room can help do that. We can provide locations where the students and teachers can come for after school and summer programs and expose them, as you said. They don't have to go to a 4-year school. There's many paths open to them, but expose them to asking the questions, to not being afraid, keep them safe, as Adele says, keep them safe, but expose them to what is possible in the entire spectrum of what is possible. So we're asking that exact scalable model right now. Our graduate and certificate program was the first step, and now we're talking with a couple of different locations. Where's the next site going to be? So we can model out that scalability. Your question is exactly the right thing.
Thank you,
Thanks, Jack.
On the scalable front,
Okay.
we realized some people had come to us and they said, we have technicians that we have to train to use certain tools. But if you have to train someone to use a tool, as many of us who've done this know, it takes hours and hours, maybe days, maybe weeks, depending on the complexity of the tool and how quickly the student can learn to operate it. And that comes to the hands-on part. So how do you make hands-on scalable? We ran a boot camp last week. We could only take 12 participants because you can't crowd people to do something. You have to let them do it individually on the tool by themselves, and that takes time. So we were thinking about how to make it scalable. And one of my colleagues has designed a simulation, well, for several tools. And I know that John Bellato is here. He has served as a subject matter expert on this tool. The fiber lathe, for example, it is a complicated tool. It's dangerous, so you have to be safe with it. But this colleague of mine and his other team, they designed a simulation where the student can learn pretty much 80 to 90% of tool operation just by sitting on their computers. And then the last 10%, they go into the lab. So this minimizes the amount of time it takes for the person at the tool to train you, keeps you safe, and you come in fully prepared, having done this. It's like flight simulators, but here it's a tool simulator. And fiber lathe is one. A pick and place tool for microelectronic chips, a die bonder, is another one that we've created a simulation for. So this is one way to make hands-on a little bit more scalable.
I worry about that though, because I feel like simulating hands-on is not the same thing.
Of course not. This is
And-
why they have the 10% to come back in the lab and actually do it.
But I think it creates an expectation that the job will be behind a computer. And not all the jobs will be behind a computer. Sometimes you need to have the person with the steel-toe boots and the hard hat on,
Oh yeah.
doing the work.
Oh, they know that. We tell them that you have to be at the tool. Ultimately, that's the goal, but how to prepare you to be there.
It's a path-dependent process is what you're talking about, really. Well, was there a question from the audience? Yes, Jennifer?
I was, with regards to like class education and kind of like the pipeline of people coming up, I was wondering if this is something as a community that we've done better historically in the past. Is it something that's maybe the ground is shifting under our feet and what we used to do is no longer working? Is it both? Is it something different, and to kind of understand a little bit more how we are where we are now with regards to needing to do things differently?
Yeah, if I may, it sounds to me like you're talking about, we used to have glass programs, from engineering programs, art programs, and they've become broadened to like material science or liberal arts. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
A little bit, but mostly with regards to getting like the glass part of it specifically, and there's been a lot of discussion about doing things differently, and I was wondering, well, were we doing it well before, or like the ground's shifted under our feet, we need to do things differently?
Yeah, so have we lost some specificity?
Yes.
And has that hurt us? Yeah, okay. Anybody?
Well, in the art field, we certainly have, and yes, it's hurt us. One of the things when you were talking, we have now sort of fab labs, fabrication labs, and there's this tendency to, instead of having a painting major and a sculpture major, to have a fine arts major. And they've been so kind as to let the crafts in, which I find insulting, and that there is actually a very different pedagogy. I would say that in the fine arts, you're led by an idea, whereas in the crafts, you're going towards an idea, working with your hands. And when sculpture teachers teach crafts, you don't get anything the same as before. I don't like the fact that traditionally crafts is a stranglehold on, I've heard people in the stained glass, which is my personal field, say things like, well, you have to learn all the rules so that you know how to break them. No, you don't. You can break rules without knowing rules like crazy. Go ahead. What's going to happen? The Earth's not going to spin off its axis. So I don't like the traditional crafts education and its insistence on that it owns the right way to do things. But in terms of allowing students to explore material with their hands, it couldn't be beat. And it's not sustainable at all. And in fact, my department was eradicated. They called it sunsetting. So, because it sounds pretty that way. But they got rid of all the crafts in my school, and they keep saying they're going to bring them back. But it's false. They're going to bring them back as a part of fine arts. They're not bringing the fine arts back as part of craft, right?
Yeah. Other comments on the loss of specificity in our programs?
I don't know if it's really a loss. If something, because it expands and you look smaller, doesn't mean that it has become smaller. I don't think the interest, and something I think we should really focus on is the two aspects, like the 2 or 3 aspects of the problem we've been talking about. There's a content aspect, right? There has to be some content. And class is fantastic, that it is very engaging, right? You don't have to spend any more time or to engage a kid, right? They get automatically, it's so exciting, right? And so make use of that fact, develop the content, and now there are bigger societal problems. I don't think we'll be able to fix those. Those are politicians' problem, they're Congress problem. Yes, we can bicker about it, we can bitch about it, but really we won't be able to fix it. And so yes, I think it's good to talk about it. And now let's start thinking about the solutions of the problem that we've been talking about. And certainly, and I think I'm glad that Ceramic Society and really they're coming up with the kits for this International Year class. So this is the kind of place where we can work. We can also work in volunteering, right? Wherever there is opportunity, we can go out and engage more volunteers to bring the teachers in, the professors and so on. Materials Society has a materials camp. It's all over the country. They have materials camp. And can we piggyback on those material camps where we can introduce glass, the glass kits, and we can introduce to them. And so this is, I see where, our solution is, whether they call it glass or they call it materials. I'm not offended, And it's because still they're learning about glass. I mean, they have to learn about glass because it's such fantastic thing.
I saw Dick's hand first, I'm sorry. Gabrielle,
Maybe
this will be
just
the
a-
last question.
Just to follow up on Judith's point, though, I think there's similar pressures or similar trends in engineering education, that the hands-on lab experience is expensive. And getting to some of the other points, and it seems to be easier to teach engineering over a screen, do it virtually. And there's pressures on the standard university model, at least for engineering education, right, is a kid goes to a campus and spends 4 years and leaves. Well, that's also expensive. And this push towards MOOCs and online education being important parts of education, I think gets to Jen's point where we are then losing this hands-on direct immersion into these materials. And it's a trend, and it's happening, and we as a community are going to have to understand how to deal with it.
This seems like a great topic for the Ceramics and Glass Industry Foundation, among other organizations. So I'm sure that this topic will continue. We're nearing the end of our session. As a matter of fact, I want to stay on time. I want to offer each panelist a chance to make one last remark, starting with anybody? How about Adele? Let's go down the line. We'll start with Adele. One last remark.
Okay. Sure. I think my last remark would be about how we need to reignite and reengage. So it kind of addresses the last question as well with what is all this change we keep talking about. I think if you look at the last 2 years, if you're looking at K-12 ed, it is being demanded now. It might have been a topic before cursory, and now we absolutely need it. We cannot go back to teaching in those classrooms like we did before. There's chaos happening in those classrooms. So what are we going to do to reignite students, to re-engage the students, but also the teachers? We can't forget about those front line in the classrooms. Thanks.
Perfect. Jackie?
Yeah, and I'll build on that. The creativity and innovation in K-12 and in colleges is essential to teach. And I think that this community has an ideal opportunity. This is not my community. I'm a biochemist, not a glass scientist of any sort. But talking to so many of you who care about how the folks, how are you going to get the next pipeline of students to do all the different levels of jobs? That's a great question, and it's great to see a community as engaged in this around glass, but asking those exact questions and having a panel like this at a conference like this. So thank you.
Great, Jackie. Thanks, Scott?
Yeah, so just to represent the manufacturing voice, it's a huge part of the U.S. economy. Right? It's about a $20 billion add to the GDP, and really we wouldn't be here without the glass manufacturing that happens in this country. There's been a cultural shift in this country that puts that industry at risk. So we're doing good at the top. We're struggling with those missing millions, like it was talked about earlier today. with regards to education, I do think online can disrupt parts of education, but it's probably more of the first 2 years of a 4-year program. Then you really need people to have their hands on understanding their discipline. I've hired dozens of students. The best ones have worked in a glass shop. In the best scientists, because they understand and appreciate the material.
Great.
So that's what I believe.
Thanks. Anu?
So I agree with all of our panelists and lots of people in the audience that it's important to bring many methodologies to education. One of them could be a lecture, it could be online, it could be in person. Another, that gives you knowledge. The second thing that you might want to think about, there are 3. So the second one would be, how do you build intuition about a topic? And that can come about with really good visualization skills, and that's through some of the simulations that we're talking about. It taught me about how photons travel through waveguides, although I've been doing it for 20 years. It really helps you. The visualization builds strong intuition. So that's the second part. The third part of it is how to do, how to make, how to be hands-on. Teach capability. So those 3 put together, I think, can build a whole educated person who can contribute to society.
Perfect. Thank you. Jim?
I'm just going to be really honest and say I think when it comes to all arts at the higher education level, it's okay to unplug the patient. I really think the future of the arts will lie in apprenticeships and in programs like Pilchuck. I don't think you're going to learn art in art school anymore. You're going to learn how to write a social studies paper in art school about art. You're going to learn art theory. That makes me incredibly sad, but sometimes these things have to happen.
Thank you for your passion.
This
Come on,
affects
Jim.
me all the time.
I know this was the panel about education, and I really see that there's room for innovation in education at all levels. It's not a question of either or. Really, there's a room for innovation at elementary school, middle school, high school, and as well as graduate school. You know, that's what essentially I'm looking more closely. So I would say if we have to something, as I said, that let's focus on content, you know, what we can do it. Let's focus on solution as we're trying to get it, right? We have figured it out. We have really looked at all the problems. Think about the solution. And one thing that certainly we can do it, and I and my program did that. Yes, you're going to build hands-on experiments to engage kids. And the requirement is that your experiment altogether should not cost more than $100. And that way you can take it down to the almost poorest schools. You know, you can run the whole whole semester of experiment for less than $100. And if you make that as a requirement, and that's what manufacturers do, that if you're going to make a product, it has to come down to this price, right? And they do this. So do the same thing to the education and engaging kids.
Great. Yeah, so we've reached the end of our time. Thank you. Please join me in thanking the panelists. They did a great job.